We're working on a custom rug request and I'm about to go in and tuft all the lettering on this custom logo rug. So I figured I would give you guys a step-by-step tutorial on how I do that. Our main focus for doing the lettering is our line work. So we just really, your main focus here is gonna be following these lines and not going over the lines. We wanna make sure there's tons of space here in the background. That way we're not overlapping our yarn threads when we're doing this. And that's gonna really allow for that clean line. So we're gonna make sure our lines are even along the bottom. We're gonna make sure we're following our tracing. We're going to take our time. Main focus is the line work. Secondary focus is gonna be filling those lines. Another thing I do is I tap the trigger on here so that way I can remember like how many loops that I do, so that way each letter is congruent. If I start going and my thread starts catching into another thread, I'll just immediately stop and pull my machine out and like readjust. That way I'm not tufting over the same spot. You don't want to pack too much yarn into one space, or it's when you're finished, it's going to be extremely thick in that one spot and it might even make it like a lot harder to trim. Before I work myself up about a stitching being like too crooked or too out of place, or before I go over something a bunch of times, I will just keep tufting through and then really analyze when I am trimming it on the back side to see how it's filling out. See, I don't know if I want to continue going and make this thicker or leave it. I'm going to leave it for now. So we're going to just fill it with 3 strands, and then if I need to add a 4th, I will. Look, this, I'm starting to come in because that line, your tufting gun wants to follow this weave. It wants to follow the weave on your thing. Even so, when you have crooked lines and you're trying to follow them, sometimes it'll pull your threading like more straight. So as soon as I notice it's pulling, I stop and then I will just restart and put my thread at a higher spot and keep tufting. Once we go through and do all of the letters on here, then when I'm trimming it up on the back side, I'll show y'all how I go through and try to make sure everything is the same thickness. Remember, you can always take your threads out at any point if you notice that you messed up or if you don't like some of your lines. However, while you can do that, You can't do it an indefinite amount of times because you will wear down your stitching in like the cross stitch in your fabric. Now, sometimes my ADHD brain doesn't let me just do the whole outline and then come back and fill all the letters in at once. And so in order to maintain the rule of doing the outline first and then filling it in, I will do just a letter or two and then fill it in and then move on to the next couple letters or two and then fill them in, and so on and so forth. So now that we're done with the lettering and we have all of that dark blue that we're using tufted through, I went back through, make sure I liked the thickness of my letters like we were talking about earlier. And now we're moving on to the most crucial step and getting your letters to look very clean on your rugs, which is to go in and trim the heck out of everything that you just tufted. We're really focusing on following the lines that the letters have already taken the shape of to just really trim away that excess yarn that's hanging over. So we're gonna hold our scissors kind of at an angle in towards that color and just slowly snip through, making sure our lines are really straight as we're doing this. And just as I was being pretty careful and slow when I was actually tufting the letters, I'm doing the same thing here as I'm trimming them with my scissors. I'm really just making sure I'm following the line path that I've already tufted and slowly cutting away that overlay of yarn. Now, some people would just go straight in with their trimmers, I've seen, but me personally, I like to go through and vacuum everything off. That way I can kind of see my letters compared to my cloth better when I'm using my trimmers, because I do not want to accidentally cut my cloth. And one thing that I found that really helps me is to really get in there with your fingers and move the yarn around, move the lettering around, and get all of that excess out of the spots where that background is supposed to go, so that way you can see the cloth when you go and bring your trimmers in. I really tried to get an angle that would allow you to see how I hold this when I'm trimming these letters. And if you take that flat part and just put it kind of against your cloth and again follow that natural line, then you won't tear your cloth. Now, if you angle this in a way to where those teeth hit the cloth, you're definitely gonna tear it and be pretty upset with yourself. Again, we're just doing this really slowly and just cleaning up the lines a little bit more. I do this after every single color I tuft on my frame and then get a really, really good vacuum in there before filling in the background color. That way they don't blend. Before I glue and back my frame, I just double check that the letters are the correct thickness. I don't need to redo any spots or anything like that. Then once we're dried and backed up, we're moving onto the table to trim the letters again. So here's an up close shot for you guys of a trimmed letter versus a not trimmed letter once we've taken it off the frame. So we're essentially just taking our trimmers once again and going back through, following the straight lines on our letters and just removing some of the excess background that kind of hangs over our primary letter colors. Now I'm only putting my trimmer like a couple of teeth down into the background color and still holding it at that angle to make sure I'm not trimming any of the letters that I don't want to be trimmed. I'm really focusing on just trimming that background color down. Now, something I highly recommend doing before you go in and start trimming, but it is very time consuming, is take something like a screwdriver, or I'm using a nail here, to weave in between those two colors and kind of separate them out so those yarn threads separate from one another. It really saves you time in the long run and makes the trimming process so much easier. I think the most important thing you could take from this video is literally just take your time. Okay, here's what it ended up looking like after we trimmed it. I am honestly in love with the color combo of the blues in this logo. Let me know what other help y'all need in regards to tufting. I will tell you next month I'm working on adding new products to the shop, so I'm going to be back with a video on that in the next couple days.